Heart and Hand is delighted to be partnering up once again with NordVPN, the premier VPN service available. You can safely search out what you like anywhere in the world with NordVPN and make sure that your privacy is protected. Go to nordvpn.com for the full range of offers. Hello everyone and welcome to Heart and Hand, the Rangers podcast. My name is David Edgar. I am your host as always on the show, and joining me today to discuss all the latest Rangers news, goings on from the weekend and look ahead to a huge European fixture, it's Cammy Bell. Good afternoon, Cammy.
David, thank you for having me on. A couple of shows from me last week, so it's always good to have you back.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. But yeah, well, a strange weekend in a way. Rangers playing Morton at home in the Cup, and a performance that really sort of left us saying, well, the important thing is getting through in the Cup. You tend to say that to yourself after, not a great performance against the side that you were expecting to do a lot better against in Morton. And that's no disrespect to Morton, but realistically, Rangers should expect to not have it tight going into injury time, which is what happened at the weekend. But then the following day, of course, Kilmarnock defeated Celtic, and suddenly it's important to get through in the Cup took on a bit of a new meaning at that point. Now, we're not going to focus too much on a result that didn't involve Rangers, but equally, we don't want to patronise people and pretend that somehow Celtic going out isn't a good thing. They are the side that have stopped us winning trophies over the last few years, bloody frustratingly and annoyingly. And if they're out, it does make it easier for us. However, what it doesn't do is guarantee it. And I think I was as guilty as anybody in 2020, 21, where we should have won a treble. We actually dispatched of Celtic on the way in the Scottish Cup and then still didn't win it. So there's no guarantees, Cammy, but yeah, you'd rather that they were out and than we were having to maybe go and play them in the final type thing. I think that it should, on paper, make it easier.
I mean, yes, of course it will, right? And let's not get away from that because we've had, as you rightly say, David, in recent history, been denied a cup, which frankly I've always considered the Rangers trophy, and we've went without it for far too long. So it will make it less hard. I wouldn't say easy because I think that's a little bit disrespectful, and I don't think that we're in a position
No, we're
we've
not.
been so trophy laden that you can be blasé about it, right? So it's not as hard as it could be, but if I was a fan of any of the other teams, I would turn around now and say, well, of the two teams that were likely to win it, 50% of them are now no longer in the competition. Does that give them more emphasis?
Of course it does.
We've got a great draw, in my opinion, because I think that we've very soundly beating Livingston at home, already so far this season. So we've got them again at the end of September. So I'm perfectly happy with that. So we then need to look to see, obviously, who else is still in it if we progress past Livingston. And I will use cautious optimism. We just have to beat who's in front of us. And right now that's Livy. And I feel very confident about us being able to try and do that. So we just need to see what happens thereafter if we get through.
Yep, totally agree. Very much looking forward to that. And I'd rather be playing Livy that week than Call of Duty, which is what Celtic will be doing. But let's go to Saturday afternoon. Much change side. 8 changes to the team that had played earlier in the week in Switzerland. And the manager said not a Rangers team that you could expect to see that often. At the game, I was pretty frustrated, to say the least. And I think understandably so. Of course, losing the lead and then having to come back and get the victory. Glad that we did, clearly, but I left fizzing. Watching the game back again, with the tension game, home game against Morton, that probably says its own statement. But they did create a lot, Rangers. That's the one thing in the first half in particular. And it is one of those games that if you take 2 of the chances in the first half, it's 2-0. You're quite happy. You probably go and add another couple in the second and everyone walks away saying, fine, job done. But we didn't. And unfortunately, that's been the key thing for us for so long, Cammy. And after a while, you can't keep saying, well, we made if we'd done that, if we'd done that, if we'd done that. you've got to do it, and you've got to go ahead and do it. The reality of the situation wasn't that we took 2 early chances, went on, and everybody said, we played quite well, made some chances, scored 4. The reality was that we went behind and ended up having to come back and just about win 2-1. So I can totally understand when people say, well, there were some good things in the game, because there were, even if I maybe didn't quite take them in at the time. But this Achilles heel of ours, or Achilles front toe when it comes to finishing, has been going on so long. We have brought in players to change it. I suppose the manager would argue that 2 of them did score at the weekend. I think it's just an overall sense of frustration that it isn't clicking as quickly as we all wanted it to. And I think we're realistic as fans, and we understand, well, it's going to take time and whatnot, but it still doesn't stop you feeling frustrated.
No, listen, of course not. And I think, obviously, I mean, I'm going to stop talking about Kilmarnock soon, because it feels like as if it's a stain that we just simply can't get rid of until, we do get a few games under our belt. And we could stop talking about it this time next week, David, if we get to a stage where if Celtic were to lose in the league, and then all of a sudden we get back onto an even keel. But right now we're behind the 8 ball, and that, has its own scar tissue even this early on, because you feel like as if that optimism and all the build up across the close season, players coming in, the money spent, etc., all of that was burst as soon as obviously we came out of Rugby Park. And I think now what we're kind of waiting on is something like that being able to try and kick off. And I think I'd mentioned on Flagship last week, I came out of Livingston and I was really happy. I was buzzing because I thought that's 4-0 against a team that can be quite stuffy. We've got a variety of goal scorers on there. Rabbi Matondo has come on and made the difference. If you told me that prior to the game, I would have wondered what leg you were pulling. So there were progressive signs, it was kind of getting better and stuff. I agree with you. I think, watching the game back, you look at the Dessers chance, Matondo had a couple of opportunities in there and stuff as well. I think it was hard viewing in real time, but when you come back to it and you see it again, you say, well, ifs and buts, that falls the other way. Dessers does well with that first attempt early on in the game where controls it beautifully, turns in the half volley. Now, fair enough, he hit it straight at the keeper, but that goes anywhere else. I think that's one of the goals of the weekend. These are just, and it's what Adam and I discussed recently, actually, it's fine margins. It has to be easier than we would like it to be, of course, but at the same point, I still think that there's positive signs moving there. And I think you're right. I think the manager could turn around and say, well, a Dessers the Nero equaliser and winner, then that's what we brought them in for, albeit it is against Morton.
Yeah, and I think that's what you keep coming back to. That's, if you like, the caveat that you keep coming back to it as against Morton. And yeah, there were some decent things, and we'll start with that. I thought that, as you say, Matondo looked sharp, he looked pacey. People were complaining about his final ball, and they were right on a couple of occasions, but there were also times where he put really good balls in and the strikers didn't react. There's one in the second half where he's put it right across the 6-yard box. If anybody makes a run, it's a tap in, and nobody does. So I don't think you can hold that against them. Far too early to be extrapolating anything off the back of, as you say, 20 minutes against Livy and a game against Morton, but at least he's giving you food for thought. And I agree with putting him into the Euro squad because he does offer pace, and we don't have a lot of that. So that that was a positive thing. Danilo, I thought, again, looked sharp when he came on. Dessers getting there. I don't think Dessers is going to be somebody who's involved for 90 minutes already. There's signs that he's more a guy that will score goals and pop up and do the odd thing. He had a wonderful effort in the first half when we did supply him with a good ball in. We'd gone for a different fullback system. We had John Leafico at left back, and we had Dujon Sterling at right back. Neither of whom are what you would consider attacking fullbacks. John Leafico is mainly a centre half, and Sterling has spoken about that he focuses more on his defensive work than perhaps on going forward. So that perhaps reduced a bit of threat from the wide areas. So those I felt were the main positives. The negatives, I thought Sam Lammers didn't do much, and what he did badly. It wasn't just he wasn't involved much, his touch was off. I thought he had a really poor game. And I think that role, there's so much competition. The manager took the opportunity to rest several players completely. Tav, Cantwell, Raskin, not stripped for the match at all. And I think that given the the competition for those places. We've already seen it. Janis Hadji came on. He played well, I thought, when he came on, unlucky with an effort that just went inches wide, or a really terrific effort. He's not in the Euro squad, and that's caused a bit of gnashing of teeth, I've noticed, from the fans, which is an interesting one, because I don't think a few weeks ago many people saw a huge role for Janis Hadji moving forward at Rangers. It's maybe less a reaction on, or a reflection, sorry, on Janis Hadji as it is on perhaps the fact that Lammers hasn't really got going. Looked all right in pre-season, but hasn't really got going since the season started.
Yeah, and I still stand by it. We still need time for these players to try and bed in. I think that the manager selection probably showed. I think a good. I mean, I was surprised that Butland played. If I'm being honest, I thought he might have got a rest. He maybe had said, look, he maybe wanted a little bit more vocal involvement in being selected, which is fine, right? And I get that, but I think the rest of the team, it was right in terms of its setup. I think that I'm still willing to give guys like Sam Lammers a little bit of time to be able to try and just settle in a little bit. He has probably been a little bit disjointed in terms of what or where he needs to be able to try and find his space within that. At Dessers, I agree with you. Again, he's scoring goals. Personally speaking, I thought he was unlucky with the penalty decision. I think he's trying to clear a ball and Broadfoot just gets in front of him, and then obviously does that because I know there's been a lot of noise around, the amount of penalties he's conceding. I think he has been unlucky. The Hadji one I think is interesting because I think for me people seem to flip flop a little bit on Janis Hadji when they're saying about he's almost like one of these players that when he's not playing he seems to become more valuable, which I've never really understood, if I'm being honest. I think people are pretty much resigned to him now potentially leaving in this window, and that would seem to be possibly best for all parties concerned if the manager doesn't see him being able to try and play as regularly as Janis Hadji would like. But it's still very much a team, David, that's trying to find its feet and find its shape and form. And again, playing a bit of, devil's dick advocate, then what I'd be then saying is, well, the amount of 8 changes is going to completely, unsettle the team as well. So it was done in the way that you had to play it. It had to be played in such a way that it was going to give players some game time, rest other players, and it certainly had one eye on Tuesday night. So it worked in what it had to do, even though it was, pretty close at times.
Yeah, and I think that was the frustrating thing. And again, it does come down to this chance conversion thing that we keep mentioning, because the longer a game goes on, the more it's in the ballot. And it was a pet hate of mine last season that games that you should have been out of sight in by half time, at the end, you're in a real game that you don't need to be in. And it's all right. I have no objection to Rangers going 3 up every week inside half an hour and then seeing the game out. Absolutely none. That would suit me down to the ground. But get yourself into the position first. And Rangers, failing to do that. And again, we do have new players in, and they are finding their feet. I think we'd obviously want them to do it as quickly as possible, because that will erase some of the issues that we've had from last season. Hadji's an interesting one because for me, and I think this season's already proven it, Cantwell should play, and he should play in that role, I think, because that's where he's at his best. Everything goes through him. He gets involved. He can also drive tempo. And this team, if they have a flaw, and they do, it's tempo. So often they can get sucked into just side to side, roundabout, back and forth, and not really keeping the team moving about. Because, look, there are times you'll have a half where you don't score and the other team are defending really deep and really well. But that's what you have to do. If you're moving the ball about quickly, even then, you at least tire them out. You at least get them into that state where they will make an error and you'll be able to capitalise on it. Whereas I thought that for large parts, unfortunately, we resorted too much to that more simplistic, just sliding it about thing. And it's become almost like a red flag to Rangers fans. It just totally sets us off, or a red cape, I suppose, when we see that, just because we've witnessed so much of it in the past few seasons. Hadji, as I say, is an interesting one, Cammy, because I've always liked him, right? And I've been accused in the past of people saying we only like him because of his dad, and I don't think that's true, but I'd be willing to admit that maybe some things factor into your consciousness that you're not 100% aware of. But I don't really see a place for him, simply because the manager has spent money on Lammers, Dowell. He's got Cantwell there already. You just don't bring in players, if you think that there's somebody there who's already going to play, you've also going to have Tom Lawrence back, and he was in the bench on Saturday. He'll be getting, I think, woven into the side in the next few weeks. So it's we just seem to have a lot of players for essentially one, maybe two positions at best.
Yeah, and I think the thing for me when I think about Janis Hadji, when I think about his injury and his recovery, I want to think about the human being as well as the player, the asset, however you want to call it, in terms of where it is, for Rangers. Because with that amount of time out of his career that he's had through his injury and recuperation, he'll want to play as much football as he can. Now, he probably feels a little bit like he's got some catching up to do. It's perfectly natural. I totally get that. I don't think we can offer it to him at Rangers, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I think that we have players who have come in, and the style of football and our domestic game doesn't really bring out their best. And as a result of that, they're not going to find themselves being selected week in, week out. And I don't think that's going to happen. I think when you then add on exactly the incoming players that you've just mentioned, including some who obviously, as we know, like Lawrence, been there for a while but had their own injury concerns, still to come in and really make his mark. I totally understand all that. Janis Hadji now needs to make a decision that's probably best for him, and to show that this isn't a Janis Hadji slight or angle about him in particular. I've said exactly the same thing about Robbie McCrory, not necessarily due to injury, but just because of selection. And you've got to go and play. You've got to go and get games. We have a goalkeeper that we signed who was the polar opposite of that. He knew that if he stayed where he wasn't going to get game time, and he purposely moved to us in order to make that happen. Maybe Janis Hadji has to make the same decision now. And I don't bear him any ill will if he leaves. I don't think the vast majority of Rangers support would. I think what you're looking at when you're looking at Cantwell as a possible replacement within that, although I think that that could be argued. Cantwell has not just been able to drive that tempo, but he can create a spark, and he can also get that team moving in such a way that he will roll his sleeves up when he has to, but he'll also complement that with flair when he's playing with high levels of confidence. I just don't think Janis Hadji is capable of doing that at the moment, and I understand why. But at the same point, it's just not going to work for us in terms of where we are at the moment.
No, and again, we go back to, can you reinvest money? Can you reinvest a salary? All of those things. If you can get a fee in, can you, I think you've got to look at that. It's just common sense, isn't it? The way that the market is, the way that finances are. You've got to be, are we getting maximum bang for our buck here at the moment? And it is difficult because you conflate the fact that Lammers hasn't looked great so far. And you say, well, we should play Hadji, but you're then left with a guy you've just spent $3.5 million for. He will get the opportunity, and he should get the opportunity. The manager has backed him to be a big player for us, so it's up to the manager to get that out. In terms of the system that we're playing, Cammy, we've complained, I think, about a lack of width, and that was maybe addressed at the weekend with and coming into the side was Matondo, and the manager has spoken about being on the lookout for a wide player to come in. I mentioned that, we don't have Ryan Kent there anymore, who used to provide that sort of width and pace, and we might need someone who can do that for us. I'm not quite sure at the moment. I see what the system otherwise is designed to do. It's very central, quite stuffy, and it hasn't worked. Now, that just could be that it hasn't worked properly, or it could just be that it won't work. I don't know. But at the moment, I certainly can see the need for somebody who's going to be able to offer us a different option further out.
Yeah. And it's interesting because you mentioned earlier on, there's a couple of times that Tondo got some great delivery to him, one in particular for Lundstrom really on in the beginning of the game, actually, against Morton, where he was able to do a lovely touch, drove in, and I think he was just struggling to understand what he was supposed to do with it in the final third. Like, I'm not saying, I think you mentioned earlier on, I don't think the ball was bad. I think, sometimes his decision making could be questioned, but equally at the same point as well, when he looks up and there's no one else there, he's very, very limited in terms of options that he has. I think when we talk about some of that wide play, it feels a lot like when we score from a cross, it's an abnormality rather than something that should be expected to happen because some of the delivery has been really poor. And when we convert one of those crosses, it stands out for that very reason. And we've seen Borna probably show flickers of what he's
the
done.
Best, but Borna is the best crosser of the ball at the club. There's no doubt about that.
And you've seen him flicker back into some of that that quality that used to be able to show so consistently. And, that's great to be able to try and do that. But you're right, we do need someone else who can maybe do that. And if that's going to be someone in front of him, then okay, fair enough. I think that what the manager needs to be able to try and do is work out for himself. If he has to set on a system, he needs to make sure that he stands by that blueprint. And if he wants to bring in someone else with width, that's fine. But then you're going to be saying to anyone who's going to be playing within that, if it's going to be Daniil or whatever, because I know he likes to drop back a little bit, that whatever happens, you're going to have to play further forward. If Dessers has to go in there, again, it can't be what we've seen before, where we're amending the team for a striker, and when that striker is then missing, someone else has to come in and they play exactly the same step, but it doesn't work to that striker. It has to be a system that everybody understands, and I'm happy for it to be adaptable, but what it can't do is just fall completely off the cliff as soon as we've got one or two amended positions.
No, I think I'd agree with that, and I think most people would. But now we turn our attentions to PSV back again. This time last year, you'll recall we knocked them out, and they're back this year looking for revenge. Like us, they've made a number of signings. A familiar face in Malik Tillman has joined up there. He'll be over. He has been added to their squad. Having watched a bit of them, Cammy, they are very good going forward. They're very quick. They really can capitalise. If you give the ball away, they will capitalise on it. It's that simple. They're so quick. They've got 4 or 5 guys that are rockets in the forward areas. You've got to look after the ball, which is, I think, the age-old rule in Europe anyway. That's always been the case for any Scottish team in Europe. If we treat the ball like a hot potato, you'll be in trouble because you're up against quick, talented, technical players who all know what to do with it. You might get away with it domestically. You don't get away with it at the highest level. So we've got to look after the ball. And to be fair, when Rangers have had success in Europe over the last 5 seasons, it's been by doing that, by being almost un-Scottish in the way that we looked after possession. But defensively, they do look as though you can get at them. They look as though you can cause them problems. So that it wouldn't surprise me if this was a high-scoring tie.
No, I think that's fair. Because I think, there's no point in us pretending that we don't have our own defensive frailties to worry about. So, yeah, I do get that. I think what I really need to be able to try and see from us on Tuesday night, David, is just belief that we can do it, and belief that we can go out there and compete against this team. I think you're right. I think that, they've done some really clever business. Obviously, I think anyone who watched them last time we played them, they saw guys like Gakpo, and obviously he's now engineered a move to the Premiership under Liverpool and stuff. So I totally understand as to why, people are right in terms of saying that this is a very different PSV team that we'll be facing. But again, at the same point, it's about what we can do at Ibrox on Tuesday night to really implement our, pressure on them, be able to go up with hopefully a higher press than we would normally think about. But we've got the opportunity to do that at home in the first leg. And I think it's really important for us to be able just to, as I say, it is about that word belief for me. It feels a little bit like we've wobbled at times, but I want to focus on the progressive steps that we have made. And yeah, it's not been 5-0 games every single time that we've come out the gate. But at the same point, I thought we did play well against Servette. We didn't falter to a system when I know that we probably could have finished that up within the first leg at Ibrox, but we went across there. We did a strong job. PSV will be tough, but again, you're only going to get better if you play against some of the best, and PSV are the next opponents to stand in their way have been able to do that.
No, they are a quality side. There's been some discussion from fans about, would you rather go into the EL or the CL? And I do understand it because we've had some tremendous fun in the Europa League the last few seasons, and we've had some really sore nights in the Champions League. But I think you have to strive to be in the Champions League, even though realistically that you have a much higher percentage chance of success within the Europa League. But you've got to strive to be in the Europa League. It's not a disaster if we go into that, especially when you get through to this. It would have been a disaster if we could do it by Servette, even though we would have gone into the Europa League, because at least getting through to this round, you get that parachute payment that everybody knows about, the €5 million, €5 million rather. So it's not the worst thing that can happen in the world. And as I mentioned last week, you can lose to PSV. It could be, in a narrow game over 2 legs. That can happen. They're a good side. We're a good side, hopefully. And that can happen. And folk will be disappointed, but they can live with it. You couldn't go out to Servette. Servette were a side we should be knocking out. It's that simple. So there is that. But I think you have to strive to get into the Champions League and take the Europa League for what it will be if we end up in it. And I would hope that we would go into the Champions League and at least qualify for the Europa League again. But you have to try to be in the top level because you're not going to get any better unless you're in there.
You're not, and again, it's like I say, you're going to have to play against better teams if you want to be able to try and improve. And by comparison, I would also then believe, and I know it didn't work out this way last season, so forgive me for the thoughts on this as well, but I am always of the belief that if you can go out and do a decent steer against European teams, then domestically you shouldn't have too many problems. And I think the challenge that that group of players had against the teams in the Champions League last season was it was demoralising. There's no doubt around it. Now you can look back and you could say, yeah, we had key players injured and various other things as well that impacted some of that. But I don't think that was a be all and end all of it. The reason why I personally enjoy the Champions League is because fundamentally the system is designed to exclude us. UEFA don't want us in this. So they'll try and make it as hard as they possibly can to make sure that teams of our ilk, aren't messing around too much with the big boys that they actually really care about. But at the same point as well, we have to look at how it benefits us. The financial advantages aside, I think it puts us into a good steer. I think it's good for Rangers as a global brand, and I think it helps us to attract players as well. Even if it's the case that you're still saying that we didn't do well within the group stages of the Champions League, but we still recruited players on the back of Seville. So for me, being able to be on the widest European platform you can, I think still has a lot of benefits in the back of that. I'm the same as you, David. If we could get through that, still qualify for the Europa League later on, then that's fine because, and maybe it's just me being sentimental, but I actually think we could win the Europa League. And I don't think we'll ever win the Champions League.
No,
And
we
again,
won't.
that's just the way of football nowadays. Do you know what I mean?
No team from a country our size will. That's simple.
No.
It's just the financial gaps are too big. That there might not be a huge difference. You can bridge the gap between a £5 million player and a £10 million player, but when you get into the £70 million players, you can't. There is another level, and I think we've all witnessed that. But you still want to be in there competing and trying to pull off the shocks. Trying to get better and get more money, and then you get a wee bit closer each time. And as you say, the Europa League is one that we look at and we go, we can do well in that, but I don't want to be in it. I want to be in the Champions League. If we're in the Europa League, I'll be happy enough once we're there, but you get into it. The mood obviously lifted, not through anything we did at the weekend, but I think that the mood had been quite so low because, I hate to say it, Celtic were very, very good last season, over 100 points, beat us when it mattered. And I think that obviously fans were thinking, well, it'll be the same this season in terms of how they're going to be. And there's maybe a suggestion, and it's too early to say, if I'm saying that I think we'll improve, and I am, then it's only fair to say that you would think that they would do the same. But the next 2 weeks could be pivotal, both for us in terms of season and for Michael Beale in terms of his Rangers career. If he's to win these matches coming up, we get through in the Champions League, we beat Ross County and Celtic, then suddenly everything's changed in terms of the mood of the two supports. If he's to lose these matches, then again, it'll switch the other way. So we're at a very interesting stage, Cammy, and I honestly don't think you can overstate the importance of the next fortnight.
No, I don't think you can either. I think it's been interesting because, and listen, you've known that there's always been sharks in the water waiting for Rodgers to be able to try and fall his first hurdle. And, I said similar under Lennon, I thought that it was going to be the case that we had to be able to try and keep him in there. And whilst I don't necessarily think it will go as far down the line as it did with Lennon, read sun's due, and when your enemy's making mistakes, don't interrupt them. So most important thing that we can do is continue to improve. Whatever happens with that lot will happen naturally, right? We can't control any of that element of it. What I do think is far better now is we don't have to treat them like Real Madrid, and we have been guilty of that in the past. The manager, I think, has seen where his tinkering has not helped, and I think he's learned from some of that, I hope. But obviously we'll have to wait until the first week in September to fully appreciate that. The most important thing that we can do now is continue to drive belief within our squad, being able to try and just continue to show that we are growing and that we are learning and that we are developing in that space. There's still a lot of work to go, and I think that we both said that fairly openly, David, that we're not by any means saying that we're the finished article. I think that If their early exit of the League Cup gives them a bit of fire in their belly, then okay, fair enough. But I don't think it can impact anything. We have to go at it with the same attitude and the same belief in terms of recovering our trophy, in terms of bringing the league back, but also setting out a bit of a marker for this season. And, I remember being on our shows, both on here and our Patreon site, after the league win against them, and everybody at that time was saying, well, that's fine, but it's going to have to be the first Old Firm game of next season that really matters. And we're still in exactly that same space now.
Yep, I think that's absolutely fair. Right, just before we go today, folks, we can obviously, as always, point you over in the direction of our Patreon. Some wonderful coverage over there, patreon.com/Heart and Hand. And we are returning to New Edmiston House on the 1st of December. We, of course, had, thankfully, a triumphant show there in May, but we will be back December the 1st. The public sale of tickets for that is 10 a.m. on Wednesday. You'll be able to purchase your tickets for that if you want to come along and see us. Thankfully, it will sell out, so please be quick about it because the tickets will be snapped up. Our pre-sales already going very, very well indeed. So go to the New Edmiston House website and you'll be able to purchase your tickets there. Right, my thanks to our executive producers in London, Mike Lee and Paul Miles. My thanks to Cammy.
Thank you, my friend.
He'll be back later in the week with Extra, looking back at the PSV match and ahead to the trip on Saturday to Ross County. Until then, have a wonderful week and let's hope we're celebrating a big Rangers victory. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.